This is the farmhouse where I grew up, where my father grew up, where my grandfather grew up, where my great-grandfather grew up. The main house was built in 1860. We got electricity in 1943 with the Rural Electrification Act. And now what I am doing is I'm removing the majority of the 1960 updates and reverting the era back to somewhere between 1920 and 1950. I'm going to show you each room in the order that I did them years ago. While I am no more of a carpenter or a designer than any member of my family has ever been, I'm doing it to suit me and my tastes. So after weather tightening the walls and the windows of the porch, we looked at the ceiling, which was kind of low, and again it was that homosote. So I pulled a little bit down, and I was greeted with nothing but that blown-in newspaper insulation, and that had to go. So as you can see, as I was pulling it down, it was 6 inches deep on the floor, and I just used a snow shovel to scoop it up, put it in the wheelbarrow, and wheel it across the road and dump it, and it will decompose and rot away. And with part of the ceiling down, you can see that it, even with the beams there, it really opens up the porch. So we decided we were going to put the ceiling back the way it originally was, only with some insulation. And you also notice that bump out of the closet is gone. So in the next book, I'll show you what we were going to do with that area, because we were going to close it off and not have it as part of the porch anymore. And as you can see here, I'm working my way down towards the end of the porch, pulling down the homosote ceiling and taking more of the blown-in insulation out. And when I said it was 6 inches deep on the floor, yes, it was. So now you can see the entire ceiling is down, and all we have is the open ceiling beams. And here's what's going to go back up on the ceiling. That's 2-inch rigid polyiso insulation as opposed to that blown-in newspaper. So we removed all the ceiling beams and we started putting up the 2-inch sheets of the rigid polyiso. And 2 inches is absolutely amazing. It was something over 100 degrees that day that we were putting it up because the heat was beating down through the roof. But instantly when you put that sheet up and stood under it, you couldn't feel the heat coming down from the sun beating on the roof anymore. 2 inches is really very effective. I believe there's a figure that the rigid insulation industry says that 2 inches of their rigid polyiso is equal to it's 96% efficient. And then we started covering the ceiling with 1/4-inch Luan plywood. And then we started putting up the pre-finished 4x8 sheets of beadboard. And like the southern households used to do, they paint the ceiling of the porch blue. And here's another view of the pre-painted blue beadboard. And here's that wall that I talked about that goes from the outer door to the inner door and blocks off that section of porch. And again, the next book will show you what we did with that area. As you can see, we finished up the ceiling, but that one was not pre-painted. We got down to the very last sheet and I wanted to get it up and I just painted it on the ceiling. But it's a whole lot easier to put it up pre-painted. I don't enjoy painting over my head. And we really liked how this came out, that it raised the ceiling level up to the roof line and it made the porch seem much larger. And now it's got a nice beadboard ceiling with 2 inches of rigid polyiso insulation, and I believe it's far better than what we started out with. And that is how we did our ceiling on the porch.